The trusty Commodore Amiga. Of course, this was a machine of choice for a whole generation of gamers, hardware hackers and coders back in the late 80s and early 90s. And if you watch my videos regularly, you'll know that I'm a huge fan of the Amiga. I've done loads of videos about it on this channel in the past, and judging by the reaction I always get to Amiga videos, there is still a very big following for the system even today. Now, maybe you used to have an Amiga back in the old days, but you haven't got your original hardware anymore. Maybe you haven't got the room for it. Maybe you don't want to pay those extortionate prices that the original machines go for on eBay. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you how you can have a complete all-in-one Amiga emulation system for probably around £50 thereabouts. Now, we're going to be using, of course, the Raspberry Pi, another one of my favourite machines which I've done videos on in the past. This one here is the current model, the Raspberry Pi Model 3. Now, there is a new distribution that's just come out for the Raspberry Pi, and it's called Amibian. So, you know, you've got Debian and Raspbian, that kind of thing. This is actually a fully bootable 300 megabytes or thereabouts distribution that boots into directly an emulated Amiga environment on your Raspberry Pi. So, you know, you don't have to go through like, you know, Linux UI or anything like that. Put the SD card in and it boots straight up as if it were an Amiga, essentially. So I'll show you how to set that up. First of all, you are going to need a couple of things to do this properly. Now, you'll need your Raspberry Pi. Model 3, you need the current one. This apparently does work on an overclock Model 2, but really to get the, you know, proper performance, you'll want to get the latest version of Raspberry Pi 3. You can get the bare boards of these for around £25, and obviously, you know, you need a case if you want it to look nice afterwards. This is the standard Raspberry Pi case. You will also need an SD card, or micro SD card, in fact, for the Raspberry Pi 3. Now, my local Asda supermarket at the moment are actually doing this one, a 16 gigabyte as micro SD card for £5, or a 10 gigabyte one for a tenner. So I basically cleaned out my local store, got about like 20 of these recently. So they are really useful. You want at least a 2 gigabyte one, but you know, as with any storage device, the bigger the better really, especially if you want to put extra software on there. You'll also need a USB stick as well. You'll need a mouse and keyboard, either USB or wireless with a dongle, and if you want to do it properly and don't want to play with the keyboard and mouse, you'll need some form of USB controller. Now, this is actually the Competition Pro USB joystick that came out back in around 2008-2009. These actually go straight into the USB port and will work with this emulated Amiga environment. And you know, obviously back in the old days, most people played Amiga games with joysticks, so this is nicely micro switched, as you can hear there. So I really enjoy playing with this one over, like, you know, a modern games pad or something like that. But if you got one of those lying around, it will probably do the trick as well. So what we're going to do first of all is I'll show you how my Raspberry Pi is set up, and then we'll go through the installation process, and I'll run you through exactly what you'll need to get Amibian running on your Raspberry Pi. Alright, so first thing you'll need to do is open your web browser and go to the official Amibian download site, Amibian, and this is actually hosted on Gunnar Christiansen's personal website now. Gunnar is the guy who's behind this software, and it's hosted on his personal website at the moment, which hasn't got the most memorable URL in the world. I will obviously put that in the video description, but if you just do a search for Amibian, currently in Google it is the first result, so dead easy to find. Now, this really simple website just gives you a download, talks you through a few of the features on here as well. As I mentioned, you know, it's less than a 300 megabyte download, fits on SD cards from 2 gigabyte and up. And also, I talked you through some of the hardware that you'll need, but also you'll need a few bits of software as well. Now, most of these are completely free. You'll need the Win32 Disk Imager, which is a tool for writing the disk image to your SD card. It's also worth having the SD Association's SD card formatter. Now, I often get asked when I recommend this software, why do I need that? Why can't I just format the card in Windows? Well, the thing is, if you're reusing an SD card, or it's been formatted with, you know, maybe another file system, the SD card formatter will get rid of stuff like protected areas and make sure that you're using the full capacity of your SD card. So it's always worth using the official SD card formatter. Now, the next thing you'll need is the Amiga's kickstart ROMs. Now, these are the ROMs that's needed to do anything with the Amiga, and to this day they are actually still under copyright. So what I'm going to say is, you know, it's completely down to your discretion. Obviously they are available on pirate websites and stuff like that, as you'd expect, but really I'd say, you know, do this legally, because there's a company called Cloanto who own the copyright for the Amiga's kickstart ROMs, and you know, having a company that do support the Amiga in 2016 is really cool, and I think, you know, these guys do deserve the community's support. Now there are a few different ways of doing this. If you've got the very slick Amiga Forever software package, you'll already have the Amiga's Kickstart ROMs on there as well. So, you know, they actually come with the Amiga's Kickstart ROMs, and there are a few different versions that you can download online, starting from like €9, or the Plus edition that goes, I think it's like €29. By far, the quickest and easiest way and cheapest to get hold of just the Kickstart ROMs, if you want to do it legally, is to open the Google Play Store and download Cloanto's Amiga Forever Essentials. Now this only costs 69 pence, and it comes with the officially licensed system ROMs to run Amiga OS from 1.2 up to 3.1. So essentially you'll be able to emulate any Amiga platform from the original 1000 up to a 4000 machine. So, you know, if you want to run like standard Amiga 500 games or the AGA 1200 games, this will cover everything. So I definitely recommend that you get this. I mean, you know, for the sake of 69p, you know, it hasn't got viruses, you know, it's all the official ROMs and everything's going to work. I'd say download that and give it a try. So the first thing we're going to do is format the SD card. Now, I've got the SD card format tool open here. Obviously, make sure that you've got the right device selected. I've got two in at the moment. We'll do J, and that is my 32GB SD card. So we'll click on Format. And it should only take a couple of seconds. There we are. We now have the capacitor drive available. And the next thing we'll need to do is to download the disk image from the Amibian website. So here it is. Click on that. Little link there. And it's actually hosted on mega.nz, which is a pretty decent file hosting website. Just be sure that you do download it directly through your browser, not with Megasync, unless you want kind of their custom download software, which, you know, is a bit spammy. I just use that one there. I've actually already downloaded it, so if you look on my desktop, I've got the disk image file there. Amibian 1.3 for the Raspberry Pi 3. Comes with a README file as well. If there's anything you're unsure about and you want to, you know, just read the documentation. Actually gives you the links for downloading the ROMs and stuff as well. And also, you will need some Amiga software if you want to do anything useful apart from watching the Kickstart screen. Now, Amiga discs actually come in what's called an ADF file format. And again, you know, legally you can only really get these games if you own the original copies. Abandonware doesn't really exist in, you know, copyright, but obviously if you do Google Amiga ADF files, there are several websites that will give you endless Amiga game software, which, you know, again, I'll leave that up to your conscience. Or if you know, have your own floppy disks that have got your old Amiga games on there, you can do images of your own software as well. So, you know, as a disclaimer, anything I'm going to show you in this video, I do own the originals of. So now we're going to open the Win32 disk imager software that I downloaded. So we'll move that onto this monitor. And what you'll need to do is find the image file. So I'll click on that. Go onto my desktop. So I'm doing this on the wrong monitor. There we are on the desktop there. As you can see, that's on my desktop. Click in there, double click it. And we want to put that on the SD card that I just formatted. So we'll check on the drives here. And that will be device J. So there we are. And then we'll write it to the SD card. And now this will take a couple of minutes, but what it's going to do is essentially unarchive the disk image file and put all of those in your SD card and partition it, and then it'll be ready for you to transplant into the Raspberry Pi. So while it's doing that, I've got the Amiga's Kickstart ROMs already on a USB stick. So if we move this over here, as you can see, I've got a few files here. Kickstart version 1.3, A1200 ROM. As in this video, I'm not going to be showing you a really advanced tutorial, really, you know, doing like custom workbench installs and emulating Amigas with accelerator cards and all that and WHD load. You're probably talking an hour-long tutorial for that, and there are lots of them on YouTube. I can recommend a couple of those, or maybe I'll get around to doing one at one point. But for this video, I'm just going to be showing you how to emulate a bog standard floppy disk only Amiga 1200. So I've got the Kickstart ROM for an A1200 there, and a couple of ADF image files of games that I do own. There's a demo there, State of the Art by Spaceballs, Pac-Mania, and a multi-disc game as well, so I can show you how you can swap discs when we get this on Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to leave this to write onto the SD card, and then we'll transplant the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, and we'll check it out running on there. Alright, so here is my Raspberry Pi 3, and this one is actually in a custom 3D printed case that was sent to me by Adam Summerfield, who is a listener to my podcast. Thank you for that, Adam. It's really cool. It's actually, as you can tell, a little mini Commodore VIC-20. So, really sweet, actually. And I've got my Raspberry Pi 3 on top of my Amiga 600 and 4000 at the moment. Now, in the USB ports, we've got a wireless mouse and keyboard dongle there, the USB stick that I put the ADF and the ROM files on. In the top USB port, I've got the Competition Pro joystick attached, HDMI out cable there, and the power. And I've got it hooked into this LCD screen here. Now, the first thing you'll see when you boot Amibian for the first time is this emulation configuration window. So what I'm going to do now, we'll swap back to screen capture and I'll show you how to get all your files and get this up and running. Now the first thing we're going to do is actually quit the emulation environment, which is called UAE, for future reference. If you hear me talking about UAE, it used to stand for a useless Amiga emulator. I think it's now Universal Amiga Emulator. So we're going to come out of that and then we'll be landed into the bash here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to type in raspi-config. And this will bring up the Raspberry Pi config screen. And we're going to expand the file system. So we'll click on that. And then now the root partition of the SD card has been resized. This really just means that all of the empty space on the SD card will now be available for us to store our files on, our games and disk images and that kind of thing. So we'll come out of that quickly. And that'll be available on the next reboot. So would you like to reboot now? We'll say yes. And give that a moment, it will reboot back into Amibian. It's actually configured to boot directly into the emulation environment out of the box. So we're going to come out of that again, because as you can see we've got no ROMs at the moment. It does come with the AROS kickstart ROM, which is kind of like a third-party open source version, but you know, if you want to use the original Amiga ROMs to guarantee compatibility, I'm going to show you how to copy those onto your SD card for now. So we'll come out of there, we'll click on quit, and then there's actually a file manager that is included with this, which is called Midnight Commander. So we'll type in MC and that'll bring it up. As you can see here, we've got two windows here with the different places, file system directories and that kind of thing. So what we're going to do on the first one is going to click back and we'll go into media, and then USB should show me my USB drive. So as you can see down here, I showed you on my PC, we've got the kickstart ROM there and a few of those ADF files. Now if we press tab, that'll take us into the other side, and this is actually the stuff on my SD card. So we'll go into /Amiga, /kickstarts, and then tab will take me back to the other side. Obviously I want to copy the kickstart ROM over, so I'll highlight that, and then if you look down the bottom of the screen, we have a few numbered options. Number 5 is copy, so you need to press F5 on your keyboard. Would you like to make a copy? Which we do. That is fine. Click on OK. As you can see, that's copied over. Click on tab, then the backslash. We'll go into floppies there. Tab again, back over there, and then we can hold down Shift and actually highlight the files that we want. We'll have that one as well. F5 as well. That will copy those over. Go down to OK. As you can see, they're all in there now. And then, and that's just a starting point. Obviously, you could have a lot more that you've downloaded and copy those over, but you know, for now, that will be a good starting point for this. We'll press F10 and we'll give it a reboot again. Alright, now we should have everything ready to go just to get a really basic floppy disk based Amiga 1200 system up and running in the emulator. Now obviously, as I did mention, you can add a load more kind of stuff to this, and you know, custom workbench discs and hard disk images and loads more games and all that kind of thing, but really this will just get you up and running with a really simple setup. So what we're going to do now is to get the emulator to match a stock Amiga 1200's setup. So we'll get dropped into this screen here. If we go into CPU and FPU, we want to change that to an 020, which is what an Amiga 1200 came with. We'll click on that. No FPU, so we can leave that alone. It generally gets set at the faster speed by default, although I do find some games do run a bit too quick. I might have a few glitches, so if you want it to match the original Amiga 1200 speed, change that onto 14 megahertz. The chipset wants to be on AGA, and also by default, these two options are set here as well. Blitter is normally on normal, and copper is ticked onto the fast copper mode. But I do find that some games do get graphical glitches with these options set on for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but I find I have a lot more luck disabling that and putting that on immediate mode. Maybe someone with a bit more knowledge of this can explain in the comments, but you know, for me, if you're getting some graphical glitches, I'd recommend changing those settings to being immediate and disable fast copper. And then if we go down to the RAM section, we'll put that on 2 megabytes of chip RAM, which the A1200 came with by default. And on the input section here, because I booted my Raspberry Pi with a USB joystick attached to it, as you can see, it's actually automatically configured all of the game controls to match the joystick. So, you know, that's done by default, so it makes it really straightforward. All your games should work with the USB controller. Obviously, you can change it to, you know, the keyboard if you haven't got a USB controller, but for now I'm going to leave that as it's set it up for me. That should work just fine. And then the last thing we need to do is to change the ROM. Now, out of the box, Amibian comes with the AROS Kickstart replacement ROM, which is quite a modern open source replacement for the Amiga's Kickstart ROMs, although it's kind of in development at the moment and it's not completely compatible. So I want this to match an original Amiga 1200. So we're going to use that ROM that I copied over from the USB stick. So we can change that by clicking on the little 3 dots there. And then we need to find the directory where we copied the Kickstart ROMs over. So if you keep clicking on the dots there, that should take you back to the root of the SD card. Then we can scroll down and click on the root section here, and then into Amiga, into Kickstarts, and then that should show the file that you copied from your USB stick before. Yours might have a different name depending on where you got the ROM from, but this is the one that I've got for the Amiga 1200, Kickstart version 3.1, so we'll click on that. And then if you'd like to save this configuration so you don't have to set it up every time, you can click on configurations there, give it a name, so we'll call it A1200, give it a description if you like, and then we can click on save. And as you can see, it will appear in there. You can always delete configurations out of there if you want, but we'll stick with that for now. And we double click it and it should load into the Amiga's Kickstart ROM screen here. So now we've got an Amiga 1200 up and running, we need some software. So we'll press F12 on the keyboard and that will bring up the configuration screen again. Go into floppy disks and then we can see the Amiga's disk drives. Now by default the Amiga 1200 only came with an internal floppy disk drive, DF0. You can add up to 4 external drives. So if we want 2 drives for example, we can highlight DF1 there, click on reset, and now we should have 2 drives visible to the system. A lot of games will only boot from DF0 and many disks, you know, games that come on like 5 disks, unfortunately will only use DF0 as well. That was some pretty lazy programming back then. So there was actually a syndrome that single disk drive Amiga users used to get called floppy disk wrist. I remember it well from all the swapping. So what we're going to do now is insert a disk image. Now these are the game images that we copied over before, so I'll click on the 2 dots to take me back there, back a level, click on floppies, which is where we copied those over to, and we'll try the Addams Family, which is a single disk game. Click on resume and it should load the game up. And I will just say, this does also emulate the speed of an Amiga's floppy disk drive as well, so it is just like the real thing, pretty slow. And as you can see, the Addams Family is loaded here, that classic Ocean software screen. I haven't played this game for probably about 20 years, so I might be a bit rusty at this. And this came out around the same time as the Addams Family movie, didn't it? What, like 1992 I think it came out? With Christina Ricci in. So if we press the fire button on my USB joystick, we should be able to control the game now. So there we are, we're into the start game menu there. And this was kind of like a Super Mario clone really for the Amiga. Pretty good platformer. As you can hear, the micro-switched USB Competition Pro joystick is controlling it there. Fire button to jump. So let's see if we remember how to play this game. Oh. And it does control really smoothly. Again, you know, it's just like using a classic Amiga 1200. Full speed, games run really nicely, really smooth scrolling on here too. So that's how you load a single disc game. What I'm going to do now is show you quickly a multi-part loader. So Body Blows, for example, had a few discs. We'll click on eject there to take that out the drive. We've got DF1 selected here as well, so we've got 2 drives available. We'll click on that, put Body Blows disc 1 in there. Click on reset. A nice crack tro here, if I'm not mistaken. We'll click on the mouse to bypass that. That's usually how you do it. And that brings back some memories, that old school Team 17 logo. And an advert for another classic Amiga platformer, Super Frog. Now I'll press fire to hopefully skip us past all this. And there we have the Body Blows introduction screen. Now if I press a fire button, it should ask me to insert another disc now probably. So I'll show you how that works. So there you go, once disc 2, so press F12 again. As I mentioned, some games require you to use DF0, but I do remember Body Blows let you use more than one drive. So we've got disk image 1 in there, click on that. We'll put 2 in that drive, and click on resume, and press the fire button. And now it will have access to both of those discs at the same time, to save on a bit of swapping there. And after a bit of loading, we are dropped into the menu screen. So one player game. I used to be Dan all the time for obvious reasons. I won't get into playing Body Blows because I'll probably be here for like 2 hours playing it. So that is just a quick demonstration on, multi-part games. That's how you load games with multiple discs. Now, obviously, Amibian can go way beyond just emulating a bog standard Amiga 1200 with a floppy disk drive and no expansion. With a bit of work, you can end up with something like this. Now, if we look at the configuration quickly, if I press F12, as you can see, we're running a high-end Amiga 4000 with an 040, stacks of memory in here as well, and some hard disk images. So what that means is we've got the latest version of the classic Amiga OS 3.9 installed here, and we have a lot of games and demos installed using WHD load. Now, if you haven't heard of WHD load before, it basically means that you can install a load of floppy-based games onto your hard disk without needing all the disk images and, needing to swap disks and that kind of thing. So as you can see, if I double-click on the letters of the alphabet, we've got loads of them installed here. Pretty much every Amiga game that you could think of. And you can just launch these by double-clicking on the directories. And then in there, we've got all the nice artwork and everything. There's the Adams Family again. Double-click that. It will load in WHD load, which was actually released for free to the entire Amiga community a bit earlier on this year. So you don't need to buy it or a key file or anything. You just download it and get this all set up, and then you can just play your games by double-clicking them, which obviously is a lot more simple than using all the disk images and all that. So as you can see, the Adams Family's loading here again. And if I was to press F10 on the keyboard, that will take me back to the Amiga's Workbench desktop. And also we've got a load of scene demos in here too. Again, all the letters of the alphabet they're sorted into. Click on one at random. Nexus 7, that was a good one. And then I've got all the artwork again. Double click those and they'll load up. No disk images, nothing like that, no messing around. This does take a lot more configuring than the standard setup that I showed you a moment ago. But if you put the effort in, I really do think it's worth it. But as I said, it's a bit beyond the scope of this video. You're talking a good few hours work to kind of get to this stage. But there are plenty of tutorials on YouTube on setting up WHD load and Amiga hard disk images. And if you've got any questions, I can maybe point you in those directions if you leave a comment in the video comments box below. But for now, that should get you up and running. It's been a really basic look at Amibian. If you want to rediscover your Amiga days and you've got a Raspberry Pi 3 kicking around, or you want to invest in one for this, I'd highly recommend it. It works really smoothly and just lets you rediscover all of those classic software titles from years gone by. Hope you found this video useful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.